Thanks, Dr Woodruff.
Order of the day number 62.
Order of the day number 10, Misuse of Drugs Amendment Drug Analysis Bill, second reading.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Greens, I'm pleased to speak to our Greens misuse of
Sorry,
drugs.
Dr Woodruff, is a vote required?
Yes, it is, Madam Speaker.
Thank you.
I'm pleased to speak to the Misuse of Drugs Amendment Drug Analysis Bill 2018. We're building on the experience and evidence of other countries around the world to introduce a safe legal framework for drug analysis in Tasmania.
I beg your pardon, you have to move that the bill be read a second time.
Madam Speaker, I move that the bill be read a second time.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, this bill amends the Misuse of Drugs Act 2001 by inserting a new Part 4A to establish a legal framework for lawful drug analysis, pill testing. The bill establishes a drug analysis advisory committee that would include clinicians, police, community services and paramedics, and would advise the Minister on matters related to drug analysis. The new Part 4A establishes a system for the issuing of permits and licences for conducting drug analysis. The bill provides penalties for a service that breaches a permit or licence condition, including being able to revoke a permit or licence and being able to disqualify those services from delivering drug analysis services. This bill sets out the circumstances when a person would not be liable for a drug offence under the Act. Specifically, a person would not be committing an offence if they were delivering a permitted or licensed drug analysis service or if they were using that service. But in the case of a person procuring a pill testing service, they would still be committing an offence if they possessed a trafficable quantity of an illicit substance. Madam Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to make sure that more kids get home safe after a festival. That's the bottom line. Yep. Pill testing services have been operating in some form for around 25 years in a number of countries. It first emerged in the 1990s in the Netherlands and is now part of that country's official drug policy. Similar initiatives are in place in Sweden, Switzerland, Austria, Germany, Spain, France, the United Kingdom, and in some states in the United States. Importantly, they are now also available in some capacity in the ACT. The Liberals continue to trade in misinformation in relation to pill testing, and they have consistently argued that it would condone illicit drugs, that it would lead to a culture of implicit endorsement of illicit drugs, and would lead to an increase in the number of people using illicit drugs. In fact, that's a totally misinformed view because exactly the opposite happens. This is now well established from the evidence of the ACT and the other countries that I've mentioned. What happens is that the people who peddle that misinformation are at least 2 decades removed from the youth drug-taking culture. And they're 2 decades removed from the new approach to providing information and pill testing. That means that people are exposed to an extensive and comprehensive education about illicit drugs and pills before they are able to undertake pill testing. Madam Speaker, it also is an indication that those people with those views are completely misinformed about youth culture. Youth culture today is highly informed. Social media keeps young people very well connected. They're fully plugged into information. But the problem is that the information that they get access to, that we all get access to through social media, isn't always correct. Young people don't want to put harmful things into their mouths. I mean, that's obviously true. Young people are informed and want to be informed about what they put into their bodies. Young people also go to music festivals to have fun. They go to enjoy themselves. They go to have a positive experience. That's the reason that festival pills that people take are labelled recreational drugs. They're labelled recreational drugs because people take them typically at parties when they are recreating, and those people are usually not part of a regular illicit drug taking culture. It is a different group of the population.
Really?
Yes,
How do you know
really,
that?
actually,
How
really.
do you know that?
Really, actually, really. There is so much information about this, but since we've eaten into so much of our private members' time, Madam Speaker, I don't have time to go into the evidence around this, but it does speak volumes about how unplugged you are into the evidence around this issue.
What I would know about the topic.
Well, I am reflecting on what I think you know from the comments, the ill-informed comments that you make, Ms Archer.
Explain how it's a positive.
So because of that, these young people
experience.
are an especially vulnerable group.
Make drug taking
Typically,
sound rude.
they're highly naive.
Just a good thing to do.
Madam Speaker,
Yes,
I wouldn't-
very rude. Please
I wouldn't-
stop interrupting.
thank you. Typically, young people taking pills in festivals are highly naive about drug effects. They have typically little or no idea about the contents of what they're putting into their mouth. They have usually no information or idea about the dangers of mixing drugs, and they absolutely would not understand the toxic and life-threatening contents that black market drugs are now being regularly diluted with. These people are very much influenced, as we all are, by what their friends are doing. When they are not well informed, they are typically trusting and sadly gullible. So these are the group of young people, and they may be well off, they may be not well off. They are potentially my kids, your kids, our kids, and they're always somebody's kids.
Yeah.
And the point is that this bill is about trying to keep them safe. Pill testing, in the form that it is undertaken at festivals, gives respected, reliable professionals privileged access to young people. In order to get a pill tested in that situation, a young person would have to sit down first with a well-informed member of the community and hear about the risks of illicit drugs. In the ACT, where a pill testing trial has been run and found to be overwhelmingly successful, the drug information is provided in combination, a combination between health professionals and law enforcement officers. I hope you're listening to this, Minister, because you have both portfolios of health and police, and it is the united desire of law enforcement officers and health professionals in the ACT to reduce drug-related harm to young people. That means they are working collaboratively together and providing young people with information about harm. Often, in this situation, that encounter with a drug educator is the first engagement a young person has ever had with information about the risks of illicit drugs. So, Madam Speaker, what pill testing does is it gives people enough information to change their behaviour. By providing reliable information in conjunction with pill testing, we know that more people change their mind. They walk out choosing not to take the pill.
It saves lives.
So the evidence is that pill testing reduces the consumption of illicit drugs. Through education, it changes the way people use drugs. It reduces the number of people who use at all, because a proportion of people walk out and refuse to take them. And it reduces the number of people who mix drugs, which is a particularly dangerous activity. Pill testing is actually the ultimate in viral counter-marketing to a youth drug culture. It gives young people information about the dangers inherent in an illicit drugs market. It deters them from using drugs, and the evidence from other jurisdictions is that they pass this information on to their friends. That is the important thing, Madam Speaker. It provides information in a viral way out to a community of people who are particularly hard to educate about risk. Let's face it, young people more than any other group in the community are prone to thinking that they are invulnerable and aren't actually that interested in thinking about their mortality. So it is an amazing lever, a huge opportunity to get health professionals in a one-on-one conversation with a young person to explain what's happening in their life and what may be in that drug and the dangers of taking an unknown substance. Given the nature of the illicit drug market, which is a black market, there's almost no way for police to get information about the substances that are being traded in the community. And pill testing also provides police with much better knowledge about the illegal drugs that are available, far more than they are able to get themselves, because it's simply not possible for the police to have access to the drugs that are being sold in the illegal drug market. We know from the evidence of the research overseas and also from the ACT that pill testing changes the black market, and products that have been publicly outed as dangerous leave the market. And that's because when information goes back into the community that a particular drug has a highly dangerous toxic substance in it, people just stop buying that altogether. They may never purchase a drug like that again, or they may purchase another one, but at least they stop being exposed to that highly dangerous product. And there is evidence that this puts pressure on illegal manufacturers from putting toxic adulterants into their drugs. Madam Speaker, we consulted widely on the drafting of this bill. We spoke to Harm Reduction Australia, the Alcohol, Tobacco and Other Drugs Council, the Drug Education Network, who produced a fantastic and comprehensive paper on pill testing and the evidence behind pill testing. We spoke to the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, the Salvation Army in their drug treatment programs. They're up against the hard end of people who are trying to recover from addiction. We spoke to the community legal centres, and I want to recognise Ben Bartle in the chamber here today. Ben is a fantastic, outspoken advocate for all people through the community legal centres movement. His work is exceptional. So, Madam Speaker, since our pill testing bill was tabled last week, it's been publicly supported by the Youth Network of Tasmania, the Tasmanian branch of the Australian Lawyers Alliance, and yesterday, Dark Mofo. Dark Mofo's creative director, Lee Carmichael, wants Tasmanian festivals to be able to offer legal pill testing to save lives. He said, "We know drug use happens, particularly in environments like music festivals, so we must do what we can to reduce the risk of harm or death." And he urged all political parties to stop playing politics with young Tasmanians' lives. We took advice from Dr. David Caldecott, a highly respected emergency clinician at the ACT's major Canberra hospital, who is also a member of the Consortium for Hospital-Based Testing Services. The ACT has now undertaken a formal pill testing trial, and a recent survey of ACT residents after that trial had been running found 85% of people in the ACT support pill testing, Madam Speaker. That is a substantial understanding that this is about protecting people's lives and reducing harm. The evidence of that study shows really comprehensively that it does both those things. Dr. Caldecott coordinates the life-saving drug analysis testing program that's been in place in Canberra since 2013. It now happens as a matter of course for any patient who's admitted for a drug overdose to the emergency department. What they do is that they do a drug analysis test from the patient, and the results are given immediately to clinicians and to police, who are involved in sort of essential first-line response to people who may be overdosing in the community. It essentially is like a canary in the coal mine, because It points to the possibility of a cluster effect where more than one person may be exposed to some toxic substance that's caused a person to overdose. The person themselves, once recovered, is provided with the information about what caused them to overdose. They go back into the community and circulate that information amongst their networks so that people know not to be exposed to harm. This is the sort of good work that we could have here in Tasmania if we passed this bill and established a ministerial advisory committee, which, Madam Speaker, is a cautious and conservative way of approaching this. We're not saying, oh, let's go and establish a pill testing trial that does not have a framework of support from a whole range of experts in the community about how that trial should be conducted. This is saying we will bring together, as a state we recognise this is so important, we will establish a ministerial advisory committee that has all the key stakeholders. They will sit down, they will use the evidence, they will have the conversation, and they will prescribe the conditions under which a licence may be granted to a service to conduct pill testing or drug analysis, and they will prescribe the conditions under which a permit could be issued so that a festival like Dark Mofo could, at their festival on a one-off basis, be able to conduct pill testing. We do not think it is any longer appropriate to have a one-off. What we've done, Madam Speaker, with this bill is we have built on the experience of these other jurisdictions and the ACT and learnt from them that what we need is a legal framework, and we need a space where all the stakeholders, the police, the clinicians, the paramedics, GPs, and alcohol and drug agencies, festival organisers, sit down and work out the evidence to establish the best conditions under which a permit and licence could be issued. Madam Speaker, Dr Caldicott from the ACT was invited last month to outline the pill testing approach in the ACT and the evidence behind it to the Ambulance Australia's Tasmanian branch. Members who were present were overwhelmingly in favour of this bill being introduced in the ACT and of that approach. They know it will decrease their workload. Having pill testing available at music festivals frees up paramedics and volunteer ambulance resources to be able to focus on heart attacks, dehydration, and all the other injuries that occur at these large public events. Madam Speaker, this bill is not about condoning or seeking to normalise illicit drug use. It is about it is about giving people enough reliable health information to change their behaviour. So, Madam Speaker, when we drafted this bill, we anticipated that it would be quite a long shot to get the Liberals over the line, and we assumed that, unfortunately, the Liberals would continue to remain opposed to this life-saving harm reduction measure. So, despite the overwhelming evidence that this approach works and the strong community support to put the health of young people first, we do know that this government continues to be committed to an ideologically punitive approach to illicit drug taking, and that they've closed their mind to protecting young people from harm. But, Madam Speaker, I was totally unprepared for the Labor Party's response. And I want to say now it is really disappointing that the leader of the Labor Party, Rebecca White, is not in the chamber to hear this.
But health is their number one priority, Dr Woodruff.
Well, funny you should say that, Ms O'Connor, because the Tasmanian Labor Party passed a policy to support pill testing 2 years ago this month at their annual conference. And members reportedly cheered when the HACSU Secretary, Tim Jacobson, moved for the party to adopt a health-based approach to recreational drugs and to support pill testing at music events. Now, either I'm grossly naive politically, or I have an enduring belief that people will do what they say they will but I honestly thought that Labor would want to work with us to craft the best possible bill on pill testing.
Just to save lives.
I offered briefings to Ella Haddad, to Shane Broad and to Rebecca White, but none of them took up the opportunity to have a conversation.
That's unfair, Rosalie. You know why that is.
I do not say that 5 minutes before speaking to this bill is a conversation, Ms Haddad.
You know why I couldn't attend a briefing with you on Monday, Rosalie.
No,
It's
I
quite
made myself
unfair.
available all weekend to have a conversation about it. But anyway, before you, Ms Haddad, I had, when I tabled the bill, handed it to Ms White and indicated I would make myself available at any time for a briefing. Whatever. I mean, it's pretty clear that the Labor Party was not intent on working with the Greens to craft the best possible bill that could be passed by this House. It is pretty clear that when Mr Broad went straight to the media and called it a political stunt, it was fairly rich coming from a party that has printed out 3,000 pictures of the Health Minister, stuck them on the Parliament lawns and filmed it with a ridiculous soundtrack over the top. So it shows a sort of willful amnesia to our public statements about pill testing since we returned from the winter break. When he calls it a stunt and they've failed to remember that we've been talking about this for 4 months, I find that surprising.
6 months.
The Labor Party also slammed it for being badly drafted and not based on evidence. Well, I've just outlined the extensive consultation this bill has been through with all the key stakeholders and the mountain of evidence for this conservative and inclusive ministerial committee approach. The stakeholders were passionately hopeful that finally politicians would put the health of young people first.
We know that.
So, Madam Speaker, I would like to hear from the Labor Party. I would like to hear from the Labor Party who they consulted with to form their positions.
I look forward to
Was
sharing
it the
my
Alcohol
views.
and Drug Services?
Yes, it was.
Was it the emergency doctors who they spend so much time talking to? Was it the Lawyers Alliance? Was it the festival operators like Dark Mofo? And what about all the Labor members who were jubilant about their party's pill testing policy commitment?
What about the Elise? Did you talk?
I think we all know the answer. The Labor Party consulted with their spin doctors and decided they'd rather throw their own party's policy under a bus than support a Greens bill. This is a self-serving political position from Rebecca White, the leader, who stands in this place every day telling us that that Labor puts health first. And this from a Labor Party that once had a proud, evidence-based, health-first harm reduction policy. It's the same Labor Party that established at the federal level in the 1990s a world-first and world-recognised harm reduction approach to drug use that led to Australia's outstandingly successful response to the AIDS crisis.
That's right.
They've held that position for decades, Madam Speaker, but how times have changed. They now seem to have taken up the Liberals' failed zero-tolerance approach to illicit drugs.
That's not true.
Well, Madam Speaker,
Completely
on
untrue.
the shoulders of the Labor Party members is the responsibility for Tasmania not having a legal framework to establish pill testing today. Because if the Labor Party had made an effort and crawled over and had a conversation with us and done anything pretty much that they wanted to amend this bill, then, Madam Speaker, it would have been up to you to put your ethical lens over the bill and to consider the issues and to make an assessment about how you will vote. But clearly, it is fairly much a pointless exercise, you going to that effort when there doesn't even have the support from the Labor Party to continue with their policy commitment. So, Madam Speaker, responsible lawmakers, as we are, should do everything possible to keep young people safe.
Hear, hear.
Young people have always indulged in risky behaviour and always will. A law and order approach to drugs won't stop festival overdoses or deaths, and neither will stern warnings. But good education in the right circumstances might. And really, when it comes down to it, wouldn't we want to do everything we can to make sure that people aren't putting dangerous, life-threatening things into their bodies? I commend this bill to the House.
Hear, hear.
Thank you.
I don't mind. I can go.
The Honourable the Attorney General.
Trip over each other, rushing to the lectern.
Very happy to speak. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Sorry I didn't seek the call properly. Look, I think we can all acknowledge that this is a complex policy and legal area. I don't believe the bill has given proper consideration to this aspect of the Act. Of course, you have your policy position, but there are, of course, a number of health and law enforcement issues, and if we had sufficient time, and maybe we will if I can get through my notes, I'm sure the Police and Health Minister, my colleague and Leader of Government Business, Mr Ferguson, would like to address those issues, but as Attorney General and First Law Officer, I'd like to concentrate on the construction of the bill itself. In the little time remaining, I feel duty-bound to do that because it's not just about policy, as we know, and I keep drawing the House's attention to this fact. What the bill does is purport to create a legal framework for lawful drug analysis at events and festivals. However, it is unfortunately poorly drafted for a number of reasons, and I'll explain what I mean by that. The purpose of the Misuse of Drugs Act 2001 that this bill seeks to amend is to prohibit the misuse of drugs and activities associated with the misuse of drugs and for related purposes. It appears to the government that the intention of this bill is unrelated to the purpose of the Misuse of Drugs Act, given it purports to focus on harm minimisation. However, the issue runs deeper than that. The bill does not address the interrelationship between the Misuse of Drugs Act and the Poisons Act 1971, as set out in Section 4 of the Misuse of Drugs Act 2001. The Poisons Act 1971 provides for, amongst other matters, the regulation, control, use, possession and prescription of certain substances and plants. This bill is silent on possession offences which exist under the Poisons Act. For Schedule 4, declared restricted substances, Schedule 8, narcotic substances, Schedule 9, prohibited substances and Schedule 10, substances, and as such these offences would still apply. In any event, an exemption from offences under the Poisons Act for the intention of pill testing would be in contravention of Tasmania's and Australia's obligations under the International Narcotic Control Board's Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs 1961. Tasmania is particularly sensitive to any potential breaches of the Single Convention. We have established and maintained a world-renowned poppy industry which is dependent upon compliance with INCB requirements and associated
medicinal cannabis
and associated Commonwealth licensing. No, that's not the case. No. It's apparent that no thought has been given to such issues, and that's why I'm drawing the House's attention to it, because it is important. The bill proposes the establishment of a Drug Analysis Advisory Committee. The proposed membership of the committee is not consistent with modern governance practice of appointing members for expertise rather than association or representation from particular stakeholder organisations.
They do have expertise.
Who may have,
so we've just lifted this from two other government.
Who may have,
who
may have a vested interest and not be impartial in their decision making. This would be fraught with danger given the broad nature of the functions of the board which are proposed by clause 38 L subsection 7. One of the proposed functions includes...
It's an advisory committee?
One of the proposed functions includes reviewing the operation of the proposed part. Review should be undertaken by impartial bodies or persons who have no vested interest in the matter. Another proposed function, I would like to get through because I'm sure Mr Dad and many other members would have liked to have spoken to this. Another proposed function includes advising the Minister on matters related to drug analysis. Potentially only one of the proposed members of the committee would have technical knowledge of drug analysis technology. This would not be adequate for the stated purpose. There are also a range of issues how the committee is expected to function from an operational perspective. This bill also, and just closing on these issues of construction, but importantly, the bill doesn't address the issue of liability. Pill testing could present liability issues if participants were to suffer adverse effects from drug taking after they had taken...
If a young person takes a bad drug.
Look, I would ask the Green members to allow me to finish, because I did listen to you in silence. I disagree with a lot of things you were saying. Pill testing could present liability issues if participants were to suffer adverse effects from drug taking after they had taken part in the trial. That's in the trial. A pill user could sign a written indemnity in the form of a waiver before having the pill tested, but an issue could arise if the person is already under the influence of the drug, as the person may not be able to give informed consent. There is also a lot to be prescribed. As a consequence, without draft regulations, there are a lot of unanswered questions regarding this bill, and we obviously don't have regulations. All of those issues aside, the fact does remain the use of dangerous drugs is a serious public health issue, and there is no safe use for any illicit drug, and that's why the government will not be supporting this bill.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I'll have Ms Haddad from Dennis, or Clark.
Madam Speaker, thank you. And let me begin by, Madam Speaker, explaining that Labor is committed to evidence-based policy and to the policies of harm minimisation. We're committed to tackling illicit drug use with prevention programs, early intervention, effective treatment and harm minimisation policies. But we won't be supporting the Greens bill today. Members may not know, Madam Speaker, but that for some years I worked in the alcohol and drug sector. I worked for an organisation that promotes and endorses the principles of harm minimisation, and I understand them well. In a nutshell, harm minimisation refers to a three-pillared approach in dealing with the use and misuse of alcohol, tobacco and other drugs in the community. The three pillars outlined in the National Drug Strategy of harm minimisation are demand reduction, that is efforts to prevent the uptake or delay of the onset of the use of alcohol, tobacco and other drugs, and reduce misuse. Supply reduction, efforts to prevent and reduce the production and supply of illegal drugs and to control, manage and or regulate the availability of legal drugs. And harm reduction, efforts to reduce the adverse health, social and economic consequences of the use of alcohol, tobacco and other drugs. Harm reduction is not a dirty word. Its main focus is reducing the amount of harm that is experienced by individuals, their families and the community as a result of drug and alcohol misuse. Harm reduction, you wanted to hear my views and I'm happy to share them. Harm reduction comes in many forms and is not limited to drug use. For example, we have road rules to reduce harm from motor vehicle accidents. We require the wearing of seat belts and bike helmets for cyclists and the like. In everyday use, harm minimisation is common sense and widely accepted. Similarly, there are harm reduction measures in place when it comes to legal drug use. For example, we have restrictions on where people can smoke cigarettes, liquor licensing laws and wide promotion of standard drink intake recommendations. Again, these are viewed positively in the general community. But when harm reduction measures are raised in the debate around the use of illicit drugs, we are often faced with strong opposition. Harm reduction does not condone or condemn either licit or illicit drug use, but acknowledges that despite efforts to control supply and demand, people will still and do still use drugs. And in recognition of this, harm reduction policies recognise that society benefits from efforts to reduce the harms associated with drug use. To be clear, harm minimisation policies don't endorse the use of illicit drugs. Rather, they recognise that people will continue to break the law and we must have a holistic policy setting and a health-based response to tackling issues concerning drug and alcohol use. An example, Madam Speaker, of a harm reduction program is the Needle and Syringe program, or NSPs. They're a harm minimisation program that provide free sterile injecting equipment to people who inject drugs. The implementation of needle and syringe programs around the world represents one of the most successful public health measures ever embarked upon. They began in the 1980s as a reaction to the increase in bloodborne viruses like HIV and hepatitis C, because injecting drug use was identified as one of the most common ways these viruses were transmitted. They also started with predictable opposition, naysayers arguing that provision of sterile injecting equipment would somehow condone the use of illicit drugs and would increase the uptake of drug use while not having an impact on bloodborne virus rates. Nothing was further from the truth, Madam Speaker, and the figures speak for themselves. In Australia, where we provide what is internationally recognised as one of the best needle and syringe programs, we have very low rates of HIV and hepatitis C. HIV rates amongst people who inject drugs in Australia are around 1%, whereas they can be as high as 50% in countries without NSPs. And HIV rates continue to be relatively rare in injecting drug use and wider communities here, with Australian rates steadily decreasing over the years. Madam Speaker, needle and syringe programs don't only present a social and health related success, but they are also economically a good idea as well. For example, these figures are a few years old now, but nationally $130 million was invested in needles and syringe programs around Australia, which not only prevented tens of thousands of individuals from contracting these bloodborne viruses, but it's also meant a long-term cost saving to the health budget nationally of $7.8 billion in saved treatment costs. More simplified terms, that means that for every $1 spent on a needle and syringe program, $4 is saved in later on treatment costs, and those figures are from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. In Tasmania, the Department of Health funds several community organisations to provide them, including Anglicare, the Clarence Community Health Centre, Youth and Family Focus, just to name a few. That's not to say government should give up on the fight against the use and the spread of illicit drugs. Far from it. We should continue to support law enforcement to effectively target the spread of organised crime and the tackling of illicit drugs. But to be clear, we must stop thinking of this solely as a law and order issue. Drug use is a health issue and people's lives are at stake. So what should governments do? Well, Madam Speaker, government should bat away the usual hysterics and implement programs that have a real focus on harm reduction. How about providing genuine diversionary programs for drug offenders, like the court-mandated drug diversion court that operates in the Magistrates Court and diverts people found guilty of drug offences to health programs instead of custodial sentences, or the police diversion programs that exist in many states for drug-related offences. Labor calls on the government to provide better support and treatment for people seeking drug and alcohol treatment programs. It's no good to just demonise people who use drugs or to have a law and order approach of lock them up and throw away the key, and I will never support such an approach. We need well-funded, accessible residential rehabilitation programs so that people can seek and receive the treatment they need. We need more funding for counselling programs so that people are not left on long, unwieldy waiting lists for months. And we need more public education programs, which of course is part of the harm minimisation approach. Madam Speaker, this is a priority and it needs to be a public health education priority. However, the opposition will not be supporting this bill today for several reasons. First and foremost, this is simply not the way to go about getting this policy implemented. In fact, in some ways, bringing on this bill puts the implementation of harm minimisation programs like this back years. I say this because the bill is a blunt instrument. It creates a layer of administration but does not contain the policy depth and background to make it work. Make no mistake about it, Madam Speaker, this might be seen as a controversial policy area. However, it appears that the Greens have failed to adequately consult prior to drafting their bill, as has been the case in other states and territories that have considered this approach, and that indeed has been played out in the debate that we've seen over the last little while. Indeed, in a rush to take advantage of the state of the parliament and attempt to get media attention for this issue, they insist on bringing this on in parliament for a 1-hour debate in the last sitting week of the year.
Well,
this approach will likely set
you people stole 4 minutes
the
of our
issue
private
back
members'
years
time.
and give the government an opportunity to put this and other harm reduction minimisation programs on the back burner. Further, Madam Speaker, if it did pass the parliament, we know this government would do nothing to implement it in a pink fit. And I quote from the recent media articles since the bill was tabled, not 4 months ago. The bill was tabled on the 22nd of November. A briefing was offered on Sunday. A briefing was unable to be conducted on Monday.
It was only out of desperation, Mr. Dad, because nobody had got back to me.
It was tabled on the 22nd of November, not 4 months ago. 22nd of November, it was tabled. So you've told people that
Order, please.
Order.
We go to the Green State Conference.
It was reported in the mainstream media.
Order.
The bill was not tabled 4 months ago.
Mr. Dad.
The bill was tabled on the
I'm going to
22nd
send
of
your hands out
November.
to Duncan.
Okay, order, please. I'd like this to be a little bit more orderly than it is. Thank you.
Thank you. However, Madam Speaker, what we've heard from the Police and Health Minister, Michael Ferguson, is that pill testing would legitimise illegal drug use.
Well, suddenly you've got faith in him.
No, I'm quoting what he said because I don't agree with it, Miss O'Connor. If you do let me finish what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this government would not implement this. If this bill passed both chambers of this parliament, there is no way it would be implemented by this health minister who has a Nancy Reagan-esque approach to drug use, who tells people that the only drugs that should be taken are those prescribed by a doctor and dispensed from a pharmacy. Those are not my views. I do not share those views with respect, Minister for Health and Minister for Police. I do not share those views. The just say no to drugs approach has not worked. The war on drugs started in the Reagan era, has not worked. Mr Health Minister, with respect, through you, Madam Speaker. Reen Hitting, the former Police Minister, said that government won't provide quality assurance for drug pushers. These statements, Madam Speaker, are quite ridiculous, and they are particularly concerning, as I said, and are reminiscent of the Reagan era in the 1960s of just say no to drugs. That's an ineffective and a laughable policy to have. But what it tells us is that this government would not implement this no matter what. So this is not the way to implement a harm minimisation program like this. And in doing so, in pushing a bill like this in a 1-hour debate, it pushes the argument back years, Madam Speaker. And yes, I have consulted with people in the sector and I have spoken to festival promoters who said they did not feel consulted, Madam Speaker. And their comments about playing politics were aimed at every political party, including the Greens, not the Labor Party alone. They were aimed at every political party, and this has been, Madam Speaker, simply an attempt to get media attention on an issue that they see as popular and not an attempt to actually get this policy up and running in Tasmania.
Didn't we fund it?
Yes.
So I suggest respectfully, Madam Speaker, that the Greens direct their anger towards the government, not the Labor Party, for pointing out the problems with this approach, and the government's failing to present a comprehensive, well-supported drug and alcohol policy. I have consulted, as I said, Madam Speaker. There are many harm reduction programs available, and I encourage the government to continue to work with opposition parties to promote harm minimisation and harm reduction programs.
We look forward to your bill to enact your policy.
But putting through something like this in a 1-hour debate, Madam Speaker, is not the way to drive policy. It's a top-down approach that has not brought the community alongside with them, Madam Speaker, and it will not work. And for those reasons, I passionately reject this bill today and put on the record the reasons for that, Madam Speaker, because the attempt by the Greens today is not to get this up and running in Tasmania, it's to simply make a point. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, the Leader of the House.
Well,
No?
well, I did rise first. I'll split your halves. Can I go first?
Of course.
Thanks.
Thank you. Well organised.
Madam Speaker, I'm going to be very brief because there is only 10 minutes left of this debate, and I do want to provide Dr Woodruff with an opportunity very briefly to wind up, if possible. But, Madam Speaker, when Ms Haddad was on her feet, there's a person who came into the front of my mind, and that was Peter Garrett. Because Peter Garrett went into the Labor Party thinking he could change the Labor Party. What happens to people who go into the Labor Party thinking they could change it? Is that the Labor Party changes them. The pill testing legislation that we are debating here today, I flagged at State Conference in September. We have spoken about pill testing in this place on a number of occasions. It is our policy. It is Labor's policy, Madam Speaker, and we get this garbage from Ms Haddad, from a party that says health is our #1 priority and yet abandoning young people on this legislation. It is evidence-based legislation. It is well, soundly drafted, Madam Speaker. Opposition parties were offered a briefing and didn't accept it, Madam Speaker, and the appalling when we have Ms Haddad get up in here and talk about harm minimisation, the syringe, the needle and syringe program. For goodness sake, Madam Speaker, pill testing, a safe, effective, legal pill testing regime is a harm minimisation measure. Now, Ms Haddad, they've done it to you before, they'll do it again. What the Labor Party does to its new members is it bloods them, Madam Speaker. It bloods them by making them do dirty, dishonest stuff. What they did in the Lennon government, the blooding that they did of Lisa C in the Lennon government was they got her to stand up and ask a Dorothy Dixer on the pulp mill because they knew she didn't support it. And they blooded her. And they got her. And so we get from the Labor Party over and over and over again. It is so frustrating. As a lawmaker in this place who's worked with the Labor Party, who's been in here for 10 years, over and over and over again, we get hand-wringing, bleating, waffle.
We get
and at the end of the day, when a bill is before this House that would save young people's lives...
They would not implement it.
Save young people's lives.
Do it.
Oh,
How
so
would you
what
get them to
Labor
implement
says
it?
now is
How would you
because
get them
the
to
Liberals
implement
won't
it?
support
Direct
this
your anger over
legislation,
there.
they won't
Direct your
either.
anger over there.
Gutless,
That government will
gutless,
ignore the will of this
gutless.
Parliament.
Madam
We've seen it
Speaker,
all day
you
today. They
should
will
be
ignore this
embarrassed.
chamber.
Now,
They will
I
ignore the
remember
will
when
of
we
this
were Duncan
Turn around over there.
We
They will not implement it.
Order.
He would be appalled. He would be appalled.
Sorry. Okay, could I please ask the Labor front bench over there to be more disciplined? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am passionate about this because I am really worried about our children who go to festivals and they do take drugs. We can tell young people not to do this, but it's like telling them not to have unprotected sex. It doesn't work. Madam Speaker, they don't listen to us. Okay, so we need to provide a safe legal framework to save the lives of young people. The Falls Festival starts on the 28th of December this year. Madam Speaker, there will be no safe pill testing regime in place. We could have enacted one if members in this place were prepared to work together to save young people's lives. Save young people's lives. This legislation is a health-based response. It is a harm minimisation measure. It is soundly drafted. If health was Labor's #1 priority, they would back this bill.
Thank you. The Leader of the House.
Needs them to act.
Thanks, Madam Speaker.
They blooded you months
Look, I
ago.
just, in the time remaining, I'd just like to make a brief contribution, and I'll endeavour to make it as brief as I can. First of all, Madam Speaker, the Liberal Party have been very clear on this. I think that's one thing that at least the Leader of the Greens and Dr Woodruff would grant me, is that the Liberal Party have been very policy consistent in this area.
That's right.
And we have said, and I do stand by the statements of the former Police Minister, I stand by my earlier remarks that were jeered at by the member for Clark, who seemed to think that it was a weird thing to say that drugs should only be taken that are prescribed by a doctor. Well, I think that's a pretty mainstream, reasonable argument to be making. Strongly backed. If I may, strongly backed by the medical profession and parents and police and health practitioners, and to rubbish that with some references to, I think, a Nancy Reagan-esque era,
Just say no.
I just
It doesn't
feel
work.
diminishes what could have been a quality debate. I will say I took note of what my colleague, the attorney, has had to say about the quality of the bill, without taking anything away from her remarks, which pointed out some of the flaws in the legislation. I've got to say, there's a bit of quality to this that I must say is a bit better than some of the other rubbish that the Labor Party has brought into this House. And I'll confine my remarks to that with some compliment to the author of it. But for me and for this government, even if the bill itself were robustly written, we still wouldn't support it for the reasons that we've already articulated. And from this point of view, I can only join with Dr Woodruff and Ms O'Connor to just draw the point that the Labor Party are somewhere off in another universe on this at the moment, because they're trying to have it each way. On the one hand, and we hate to see you argue, by the way, but on the one hand, you're trying to say, oh, well, we sort of agree with you, but on the other hand, you're actually recognising that you don't want to run the gauntlet on this, and that the Tasmanian community are not with you on this, and you don't want to be out of step with the Police Association, for example. And it is so nakedly obvious what you're up to. Now, I'll also point out that at the election, we were asked these questions, and we did say we would not implement this policy. We don't think it's safe. And I do share that sense of obligation with Ms O'Connor, who wants to save lives. We do too. We do too. And I don't think that you should pillory, and I direct these comments to Ms Haddad and others, you don't pillory the safe message and the health promotion and prevention message. And by the way, I don't think that's cast you in any glory at all to to the Labor front bench. The way you've tried to characterise this is actually because of your defensiveness on your feet. The fact is, I have, as Health Minister, and do support harm minimisation strategies, and that's demonstrated, for example, through our continued commitment to the needle and syringe program, to our commitment to the hepatitis strategy, to my commitment right across the range of health portfolio responsibilities. But when you say stupid things like ideologically punitive approach, you've just misunderstood it. The legislation actually needs to mean something, and I can tell you from a police experience, it is not ideologically punitive approach to drug users. We know it's targeted. We know it's targeted where it needs to be, particularly with the pushers. And the problem with the Labor Party position on this, shared somewhat with the Greens, is that this provides a quality control commitment to drug pushers, and that is a problem. That is a problem, and I do stand by that. In reference to the Labor Party, again, defensiveness on their feet. Look, I want to say we're absolutely solid on providing more rehabilitation and detox support. Now, the 31 extra drug and alcohol rehab beds that we've just announced at a cost of $6 million to taxpayers shows that Labor's mealy-mouthed promises in this area pale into insignificance. Now, the euphemism that I've heard of referring to recreational use of drugs when young people just want to have fun at music festivals is very problematic, because the Parliament is actually here to make good law to keep our community safe. And the very clear message, and I have this on authority, the very clear message is that the use of illicit dangerous drugs is a serious public health issue. There is no safe use for any illicit drug. And the advice that I have from police I want to share with you is this. Permitting on-site pill testing sends a contradictory message about the risks related to the use and possession of controlled substances.
Well, just abandon it, to pop in their mouth whatever they want.
There is a place. There is a place for positive health promotion and genuine prevention measures, but actually giving drug pushers a commitment that will test their product. Now, let me just ask you a quick rhetorical in the minute remaining. Let's say in your hypothetical at a music festival or some other event, there's a pill that's tested and it doesn't identify heavy metals, or it doesn't identify components that weren't advertised by the drug pusher. What then? What's the message? Is the message that this drug is now safe to take?
No, if you sit down, I'll explain.
You're taking a life into your hands at that point. And so for those reasons, I can't explain the Labor Party's politicking on this, but for those reasons, from a policy point of view, we do not support the intent of this legislation.
Mr Deputy Speaker.
Honourable Member for Franklin, Dr Woodruff has 5 seconds. No, you don't, sorry. The time being 6 o'clock, the question is that the motion...
It's a bill.
The bill be read for the second time. All those that opinion say aye. To the contrary, no.
Aye.
The noes have it.
Divide.
Division required. Ring the bells. No, yeah.
We failed.
Because Labor accused me of doing the same. Cassy says I'm reduced to this kind of politics.
Chilly.
Yeah, that's right.
Happy? Now stop the bell, lock the doors. The question is that the bill be read for the second time. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair, the noes to the left. I'll appoint Dr Woodruff, teller for the ayes, and Mr Hidding, teller for the noes.
Look forward to seeing your bill when you bring it, the pill testing bill.
Mr Hidding. Sorry. Mr Hidding, teller for the... Yeah. Mr Hidding, teller for the... Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. No, I couldn't. Yeah. Order. Debate on the issue has ceased. We're into the vote. Order. 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 Mr Bacon, Miss O'Connor. Order. Miss O'Connor, order. The debate has concluded. Order.
I'll tell you what, we'll just keep trying to fix the legislation to be able to have tonight, shall we?
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. The results of the division, ayes 2, noes 20. Therefore, the noes have it. Back to your seats. The